Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe, and I'll be walking you through my personal reflection assessment on ethical decision making and leadership, specifically through the lens of CT Confectionery as well as Bilby's Health Snacks roleplay simulation. What I want to do in this 7 minutes isn't just to tell you about what happened in the case, but I also do want to show you what it revealed about me, my assumptions, and where I still have roots to grow as a future practitioner. I'm a final year swim student majoring in international business, and I come in with a foundation understanding of financial systems, but not really a deep background in labor law. And that does matter because the quote that you see on the slide here is the honest takeaway from this entire experience. The simulation didn't hand me an answer, but rather it put me in a room where every option had consequences and it still expected me to act. The core question was that this simulation forced me to sit in was this. What do you do when protecting revenue and protecting a child's welfare directly conflict? That was not hypothetical, but that's the actual decision I had to work with. In this case itself, a Bilby's Health Snacks representative spotted what appeared to be children packing biscuits in a CT confectionery supplier warehouse during a video call. It was unverified evidence, but ethically significant enough to trigger an immediate crisis. Now, Bilby's contributes about 20% of CT's annual revenue, and that's not a small number, but losing that partnership wouldn't just be uncomfortable, but it would be genuinely destabilizing. We're talking about potential layoffs as well as disrupted operations. At the same time, Bilby's operates in the Australian market, which is a highly ethics conscious and consumer driven market. Any association with child labor will be reputationally claustrophobic for them. As CFO, my formal responsibility was to protect financial stability, but this role forced me to engage with something much larger, where I had to simultaneously manage revenue protection, shareholder confidence, as well as ethical accountability. And that's a lot to hold at once. And unlike a pure financial brief, this required me to make moral judgments in real time without the luxury of more information. Going in, I understood that my job was to represent and present CT's position, to reassure Bilby's, demonstrate compliance, as well as the continuation of this relationship. I referenced CT's 20% revenue reliance on Bilby's to make case that termination would cause real human harm towards CT's workforce or even to the dependent families of the supply chain. Framing ethics through the lens of revenue impact can unintentionally send a message that profitability comes first and ethics comes second. I reflected on four key decisions. First of all, I ventured and defended flawed audit processes using technically true arguments that were ethically weak. Second of all, I raised the 20% revenue impact to highlight human cost, but I do now question whether that was just compassion or financial pressure. Third of all, I proposed worker support programs, though I later wonder if they were genuine solutions or just a minimal ethical concession. And finally, I never directly stated what I truly believed, that the situation was wrong, regardless of financial consequences. That silence remains my biggest lesson. I applied Hofstad's cultural dimension theory, particularly power distance, to understand my response. Initially, I respectively instinctively normalized questionable labor conditions due to familiar cultural responses rather than critically challenging them. This revealed how unexamined cultural bias has shaped my thinking. And using Hofstad's framework helped me to recognize that bias and engage the issue more ethically, teaching me to consciously examine my cultural assumption in future international decision making. Freeman's stakeholder theory revealed the deepest ethical issue, which is the most vulnerable stakeholders, the children, had no voice in decisions that directly affected them. It reframed this absence as a serious ethical failure, and the framework also showed me that conditional continuation with active remediation was more ethically responsible than immediate termination, as true stakeholder management requires sustained involvement and meaningful reform. My recommendation for this case is conditional continuation. While immediate termination may appear ethical, it often removes income without solving the root issue, potentially pushing vulnerable children into even riskier work. Conditional continuation creates real accountability through strict benchmarks such as unannounced audits, children withdrawal programs, as well as educational support. This approach aligns more closely with responsible stakeholder management, international labor framework, and Australia's Modern Slavery Act. In my view, true ethical responsibility means driving change and not simply walking away to protect corporate. If CT and Bilbies terminate immediately, the real burden falls on the most vulnerable. Children lose household income without guaranteed social support, workers face job insecurity, and smaller suppliers risk collapse. Meanwhile, consumers and corporate stakeholders may feel ethically reassured despite little structural change occurring. Under conditional continuation, children are transitioned into monitor education, families receive structured assistance, while CT and Bilbies build measurable compliance credibility. Suppliers are then held to strict time bound management standards, and this benchmark approach transforms ethical responsibility into practical systemic reform. A critical part of this case is recognizing how cultural context shapes both the system and my own perspective. In many Confucian and high power distance societies, child economic contribution may be normalized as a family unit, while hierarchical structures discourage workers from reporting issues. This means that CT's lack of reported declarations was not necessarily proof of ethical compliance, but potentially evidence of a system that suppresses visibility. I confronted two major assumptions. First, I initially viewed lack of formal schooling as immediate failure, shaped more by my upbringing. And second of all, I placed too much trust in formal audit systems without questioning their structural limitations. Through Bennett's developmental model, this experience moved me from minimizing cultural differences to better adapting it to my perspective, allowing for deeper cross cultural ethical understanding. Maslow and Nussbaum help me to explain why child labor is rooted in the unmet survival needs and limited human capabilities. Removing children from work without supporting families can worsen vulnerability. True remediation must address economic insecurity while as well as protecting education, health, and dignity. Four structural challenges made this case generally complex. First of all, its audit design was weak. Semi-announced audits tested preparation and not really real compliance. Second of all, its role pressure pushed me towards financial framing instead of directly naming ethical concerns. Third of all, its inconsistent legal standards across jurisdictions created ambiguity in what compliance actually meant. Fourth, benchmarking against large multinationals creates unrealistic expectations for smaller firms, making full compliance structurally difficult to demonstrate. Using Senge's iceberg model, the visible issue is a child found working in packaging, and below that there are hidden supply tiers that sit outside effective audit control. Deeper still is supplier dependency on CT, which discourages transparency due to financial risk. And at the deepest level is a systemic contradiction, demand for cheap, ethical products that is structurally sustained by costs being pushed onto vulnerable workers. This simulation showed me that I defaulted to financial framing, avoid direct moral statements, as well as show stronger empathy for closer stakeholders than distant ones. In Colbert terms, this reflects stage 4 reasoning, with growth needed towards a principal stage 6 thinking. This experience exposed me that I was confident in financial and legal analysis, but less equipped for human-centered remediation as well as ethical frameworks. I also mistook cultural identity and familiarity for understanding when it was actually cultural bias. Moving forward, I need stronger grounded in ILO standards and more cross-functional thinking across financial and legal policies. This simulation changed how I approach decisions in four ways. I can now sit with ethical ambiguity without rushing to a simple answer. I ground financial reasoning in human impact. I actively surface cultural assumptions instead of letting them get to me. And I also map stakeholders before decisions and not after. Overall, it reinforced me that ethical leadership is about staying with complexity long enough to make the most defensible decisions. This has been my video. Thank you very much.